Hello, and welcome to the Creative Academy's Blue Pencil session. This is where we take a look at some of the first pages in your manuscript, though they don't have to be the first pages, but we will take a peek and give you our thoughts. Sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. So my name is Eileen Cook, and I'm here today with my colleagues, Crystal and Donna, and we're taking a look at a piece from Jenn Marx. And I think what would be interesting is to sort of dive in. I think overall, what I think you'll find, at least from probably all three of us, is that it's generally a very clean piece. You've got some really interesting details and various things that for me pulled me into it. But I think, Crystal, you and I are going to start, I think, with maybe our thoughts about where we start, and then we'll go from there.
Yes. So, is that a me or you?
I'll let you start, and then because I talk all the time.
Okay. There you go. So yeah, I did the first thing that kind of immediately jumped out at me was it is a really strong scene setting in the beginning part where it does get you into the world. You're kind of sucked into the prison environment and things are a bit dreary and bleak and whatever, which is good. But the story kind of came alive for me with the line maybe about halfway through where the guy has entered the room and sat down and he's talking to the lawyer, who I believe is the main character from here on out. And I didn't do what they say I did, Jonathan said emphatically, rattling his handcuffs against the metal table with nervous energy. That was such a strong line. And the paragraph that follows still sets the scene. You immediately know where you are and what's going on, but you don't have the same sense of kind of a backstory dump at the beginning. Like there's always that danger when your narrator or your main character is talking a whole bunch at the beginning for those first few paragraphs. It's doing a great job of describing the scene for us, but it's not sucking us into the action. So that just for me felt like where that moment really happened, and we got pulled into what was actually going on, not just looking at the surroundings through the lawyer's eyes.
And of course, I'm going to disagree with Crystal because she's wrong. It doesn't start with a line. I didn't know it. I didn't do what they say they did. It starts 2 lines before that. So I liked it starting with the line again, which is about halfway through, which is, I disliked the man immediately. And the reason that I selected that is for me, that raises an automatic question around why is it that you dislike this person? It also grounds me in the main character's point of view before we sort of start the lines of dialogue. So for Jenn, in terms of what is it about where you started that maybe for me didn't work, there was kind of 2 things. So one is the first line is, I hated prisons, which for me was interesting because it made me go like, does anyone like it? Like, is there anyone out there who's like, I could just hang out in prison all day long? So it did raise some questions for me, but in terms of that, it sort of at first more threw me around, like, I'm not sure if anyone did. And then probably a little bit more than that is a little later in the piece, there's a line that says, that day, waiting for Jonathan White to enter my life, I was ignorant of the potholes and pitfalls disguised under the name of justice. So for me, that almost pulls me a little out of the story because it feels like this is something that the narrator is looking back on years later, which can potentially take some of the tension out of it because we know all of this is then going to be resolved. You'll see it a lot in nonfiction, and I think it works really well in that. And on that note, I'm going to leave.
I loved it. I didn't read. I didn't know if what Jenn was writing was fiction or nonfiction, and I started reading it in the head of nonfiction. And starting with I hated prisons, actually for me it worked. My very first thought was, okay, if you know you hate prisons, you know you have a lot of experience in prisons. I think that I'm talking to somebody who has had experiences in the justice system. And in fact, the way it starts, I thought this is someone who's been arrested before. And it's not till the second paragraph, the first line, I spend a lot of time waiting for clients to be led into the interrogation rooms. And then it was a little surprised. I was like, oh, so I'm reading about a lawyer now. Okay, that's cool. And not knowing what Jenn's history is, I was thinking, I wonder if this is a story about Jenn. And it's interesting that I was totally taken in by this. I was taken in by the literary quality maybe of it. I don't know if that is fair, but it read to me like nonfiction. And where you just said, Eileen, this piece that is kind of the reflective part, I really loved that. And I guess that is part of you have an experience, and in nonfiction, you wait for 10 years before you're able to actually untangle it all. And then it makes sense in the current time, and you can tell the story with that interesting thing. And the other line that led me to that was, it was to do with the judicial system that was multi-layered, one that was neither two-sided nor flat, one that involved a deep introspection that until that case, I hadn't had the capacity to fathom. And I thought, more to the point, it seems, you didn't even know you'd have to fathom it, whether you had the capacity or not. And again, that just, to me, the setup there is something big is about to happen. And I know that the main character is going to have a big change in this story. He's starting here. It's really clear where he's starting. And we know that he is going to have a sea change in opinion. And whoever this criminal is going to force him to look at his own life in a way that he hasn't yet. And then one more thing, I guess at a certain point around here, my client was a man in his mid-40s. I probably clued in that this is fiction, but that's okay. I was like, okay, because I've already loved it as nonfiction. The one thing when he says that his client had been under a provisional arrest for about 3 weeks by the time his wife's check cleared, I'm like, what a jerk. He leaves this guy in jail while a check clears. So now I understand.
He's a smart lawyer is what he is.
He's a jerk, and he's not going to be a jerk at the end. And so now I'm hooked. Like I want to know this guy. I want to hate this guy, and then I want to see his redemption so that I can like him at the end. That's my expectation from this first part. There you go.
And you know what's so interesting to me is I took that the complete other way, and maybe it's having worked with lawyers before, but I can't imagine a lawyer that would start talking to you without making sure that check had cleared.
So maybe that's just being a lawyer.
Well, no, and fair enough. And you know what? My husband has spent 27 years as a litigation manager, so his whole day is working with lawyers. And I have to say, I know one lawyer, but from what I hear, I don't think I like lawyers. so it all fits in my own worldview. Like whether that's probably, I don't doubt that that's true, and I don't like that. So there you go.
I think some of it might be, and this would be an interesting thing around, again, in terms of redemptive story, is that this is someone who is cold and clinical, and that is going to change, which again, I don't have a problem with the lawyer getting the money up front in the same way that, my repair guy won't do things.
Or like your surgeon in the ER. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, that in general, a lot of people make sure they get the money up front. So that didn't bother me. What I would say to Jen is there are a lot of details that I did love in that first page. So I'm not saying cut all of them out. I'm saying maybe weave them in as the story goes so that we're not starting with just sort of a background and description. Like I almost want to just jump a little quicker into the story. And my other thing that I really wanted to highlight is we never know who the narrator is. Like we don't have a name for them. And if you're writing first person, generally speaking, what they'll tell you is try to find some way to shoehorn the name in within sort of that first 3 pages.
I wonder if that's also why it read like nonfiction, because in nonfiction, if you're writing in the I, you never say your own name.
You never say it. But I think there would be a very easy way, which would also be an interesting character detail, is if this person says, Jonathan, the client, says something like, I didn't do what they said, and then he says, you got to believe me, Brian, and then have the main character say, it's Mr. Smith. Like that would also show a little bit of character. And it also tells us, oh, it's Brian Smith. Because I'm not actually sure. Do we know it's a man who is the main character?
Well, we assume. I was wondering too, but it's because his wife cashed the check. That's when I knew it was a man.
Yeah.
Right?
Or
I made an assumption. It's true. And that's when I made the assumption that it was a man. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But actually, I thought it's Jonathan's wife.
That's right. It's his own.
Yeah.
Wife. And you know what?
Jonathan's wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think we know about the lawyer.
For some reason, in my mind, the lawyer was a female.
And I totally read it as male just as a default in my head. So that's super interesting. One of the other things that is a possibility as well, often when you have visitors in a prison, they are announced. It is a prisoner so-and-so to see whatever. Like it's
That would be another way to get that.
They identify them to make sure they have the right person that they're matching.
How do you know this, Crystal?
No reason.
Hypothetically.
I Google.
Okay. All right.
So
yeah, I think worked in a prison for a while. Also that.
There are definitely ways
for a while. Also that.
To get that in, whether and the other thing would be, of course, if the lawyer is a woman, then that also presents some interesting things around being a woman in a man's prison, and what, you know, maybe what she's wearing, or if she has to deal with someone whistling. So there'd be some ways to get that in if you wanted to sort of streamline that in. But letting us know whose head we're in will be helpful. I mean, I know definitely it's very well grounded in point of view in terms of I know where I am. I just don't know if this is a 60-year-old woman or a 28-year-old man. And just a little bit of that would, I think, ground us a little bit further in that story. Other things you guys wanted to comment at?
I really liked the use of words like salvation and savior, and it was just, it had this weight to it that felt like it was important. And there was one thing that I highlighted, kind of, I was the bottom of the first page. I was eager to don my lance, and that to me sounds like a male thing. I don't think women, but it just sounded very male to me. But I wondered, do we don lances, or like I thought we donned things like capes, armor.
Yeah.
So that one jumped out at me. What do you do with a lance?
You raise it. I mean, in theory, I think they had harnesses and all kinds of crazy stuff. I don't know. Lances were pretty intense. They were sort of part of the armoring process. But
it was just one of those things that jumped on. Like it made me go, donning a lance sounds kind of weird. Like, ouch.
Yeah, you don a shield because it gets attached to you. Mm-hmm. But lance maybe not so much.
And aside from that,
could lead to danger.
I thought it was really clean. Like I was hooked.
No, it's definitely clean. One of the
it's so topical. Like extradition from Canada is more of a political foreign relations ploy than an honest attempt to protect the rights of, and that's where it stops. I'm thinking, hell yeah. I mean, thank you, former Prime Minister, for setting that up for Canada and the US. Like, we have no rights there. So timely as a story as well, if this is part of the theme.
I actually like that for a different reason. So we have the character that's in prison is saying, Jonathan is basically like, I didn't do it. And what I liked is I felt very grounded in the lawyer's point of view, because the lawyer is almost like, it almost doesn't matter. Like, I'm not really concerned about whether you did it or not. What I'm concerned about is, were you someone who could have done it? Were you in Seattle at the time that this crime occurred? So I liked the way, like, to me, that just felt like, for myself, I'm very concerned with, like, did you do it? And tell me why you didn't do it and why you never could have done it. But I think a lawyer is always thinking chess moves, right? And they're thinking about the foreign relations thing. So their question is like, were you there? Like, is this something that we can just dismiss right away? And I don't think it is. And basically that's what we have to start with. And so I just thought that was just a really great example of giving us point of view from a character's perspective. So not the way I would see a situation, but the way a seasoned lawyer who deals with extradition would see this situation. And I thought that was just really well done. So I want to give Jen a little tip of the hat for that. And otherwise, I want to read this sucker. I love myself a good crime story. So I'm intrigued. So keep going, Jen, I think is the moral of that story. And don't get discouraged. The fact, again, it's up to you, obviously, where you start your story. But I've cut entire chapters. So we're talking about, we think your story starts a little bit later, but you still beat me with pretty much any manuscript I've done.
I only cut 10,000 words out of a 60,000 word manuscript I wrote, and then told me to put 20,000 new words in.
You're welcome, Donna.
And it's a really good book. So,
and you know what? It's so much better for that horrifying advice.
You're welcome. So basically, Jen got off easy. So if you would like to get off easy, you can submit your pages to our Blue Pencil session, and we would be happy to take a look at them and give you our feedback. And as always, we so appreciate you guys sharing your words with us, and we look forward to seeing what you do with your stories. So we'll see you around the Academy. Take care.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.